Thank you so much, Tim.
Thank you, Tim. I saw some great reactions from the other panelists while you were speaking there, Tim. I wanted to ask Adem, can you imagine the kind of approaches that Tim just laid out being replicable in other communities? Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, we know it works because it's working. And I think part of the underlying reason why it's working, something that's kind of a through line in what everyone's been talking about, I think, is trust in large part. Like Whitebird Clinic has trust in the community. Community violence disruptors have trust in the community, and police don't. And it's really hard to trust an authority that only has tools designed to punish people. So I think that all of these alternatives that we have that are not designed to punish people are going to be more successful because people can trust them. People are willing to work with organizations that are not designed to punish, which is exactly what police are meant to do. So I definitely do see alternatives like this working, and the volunteers that I'm working with at the Grassroots Project are pushing for locally systems that mirror what they have in Eugene, Oregon, and models for violence disruptors that we've seen across the country.
Awesome. And Paul asked Adem about general police budget cuts that could be prioritized. Do you see specific items that you suggest looking at for any city?
So I'll point out some things that I thought were really easy cuts in Austin, where they defunded the police by about a third. Those things, I think, off the top are forensics can be separated from police. That can be done by an independent body that doesn't have the same kind of pressures that police have to convict someone and have a good track record. It'll be done, I think, in that way with more integrity, in part. I think victim services is another thing where police are probably not the best suited to help people with who are dealing with the trauma of experiencing some sort of violence that was inflicted upon them or a loved one. Police aren't trained on doing those things. It's an afterthought in any training that they do receive. So I think immediately those two things we can think of as quick things that can be removed from any police department. I think also a lot of community projects that police do that are meant to improve the perception of police but don't actually serve any useful function for the community. Like, it is just a PR operation for the police to look better, but it doesn't really, it's not the best way how to invest in the community. I think things like that can also be removed from policing and just focused directly on community groups and supporting them.
I had a quick response to that question. Here in Louisville, we have seen, we haven't seen the police budget change yet, but there has been a commitment to not start a new recruiting class, and then calls for retiring officers, those positions not to be filled. So those are other ways that we can start.
That was another thing they also did in Austin, yeah.
And it's okay, I'll go in as well, that I just assume in almost every police department, the biggest single expense is tied to the number of officers. And if we think policing is the wrong approach to public safety, then we just have to start reducing the number of officers, whether it's not opening new classes, letting people retire, attrition, whatever. I'll also just say, this is more just casual observation, that DC police are really well decked out, both in terms of what the gear they have on and the equipment in their cars, the technology. And when I think about the fact that this summer we had advocates begging the mayor and council to make sure that every DC student had a computer and internet at home for virtual learning, meanwhile seeing hundreds or thousands of police cars driving by that are incredibly well decked out, I just think it's time to start shifting those investments as a way as well. Like I feel like we have over-equipped our police department, both militarily and other ways that really is making it hard to fund other parts of our community.
Awesome. Cassia, you've been answering questions wonderfully in the chat, but I wanted to ask you to go into more detail on Dave's question. Dave says, I take defund to mean shifting monies from police to other areas that are sorely needed. How do you deal with an administration like in Chicago that refuses to accept that 40 to 50% of city budgets are going to police, and that's ridiculously too much, while affordable housing gets 1%? How do we deal with administration like that?
Well, I think Ed has it. We've got to get more people running for office that really see the benefit of this strategy to change our communities. That's why I joined KFTC, because it's an organization that also, educates people about the issues and brings people together, but we also lobby locally, statewide and federally, and we also have a PAC in which we endorse and support candidates. So as Tim said, this is a small part of a larger, framework of body of work. When Bernie ran for president, and his platform is all around shifting how we invest in different things. And so when we talk about the demilitarization of the police, the police departments, that's directly related to federal policy and how money flows that way. And so there has to be a larger effort from the federal government, state government, and local governments, if you're looking at particularly in DC. So it's we've got to get new people in office, and we as citizens have to be we have to be committed to co-governance. So it's not just about electing local officials, but we also have to help them govern. We have to do that collectively. We can't just sit back and say, we've got Ed in and we know he's got our back. We've got to continue to give him the tools and resources. We have to vision and create together. It's not a one-stop shop.
Ed, I'm imagining that as a candidate, you have interaction with the media. So I want to give you this question about media. How do we change representations in the media? This is Kate's question. How do we change representations in the media to support the defund the police agenda? Currently, we're seeing headlines about violent crimes and racially profiled perpetrators getting way more attention than discussions about our communities. So how do we change that?
That's a great question, and I wish I had a great answer. I mean, I think it, I don't know, I'm just used to reporters who also stick to very traditional concepts. I'm thinking about reporters who describe neighborhoods that have gentrified as neighborhoods that used to be dangerous, scary places that are now clean and sleek. And it's, what they're really saying is it was a working class community that's now where, all the working class people have been pushed out. I think maybe we just need to push the obligation on them to educate themselves on what works and what doesn't. And I do feel this past year has opened up the eyes of maybe even Trump opened up the eyes of reporters to talk much more about racism and systemic racism and its impacts. And maybe that's just part of all of our ongoing obligation to talk to reporters every time and making sure that we are setting them straight on what's really happening and what communities are, making sure they're talking to communities about how they see policing and how it's affecting them, particularly Black and Brown communities. And as Cassia said, listening to the community as well, perhaps talking to average residents about what would make their community safer. I don't know if we're going to actually can get them to do that. Unfortunately, journalism is a dying business, so reporters don't have necessarily as much time as they really need to dig into stories, but perhaps we can help them by helping feed narratives to them, helping pitch stories to them on what actually works, whether it's more stories about CAHOOTS or other areas where we know that alternatives to policing are working. Maybe that's just our job, is to be that source for journalists.
Yeah, I've noticed that here in Louisville, we have lost alternative media, which means that we only have a few, particularly print. We only have, a major newspaper, and that newspaper doesn't have the money that they used to. So they got a lot of young journalists, and we've been able to get access to them, not just before the changes, but just really creating those relationships with journalists. They want to do good work, and they hate getting called out. Twitter, a lot of them are on Twitter. And so we have really, I would say we, just the community, have really called out journalists when they do a bad job. And we call them, they show up at protests, and they want to continue to talk to us. And so we are very adamant with them about what it is that we want them to share and how to share that. And we hold them accountable with it when they don't. And so I don't know what other markets look like, but here in Louisville, we've really, it's a smaller market. And so we're able to really hold their feet to the fire in a way, but you got to keep working on them.
Awesome. Thank you both. Tim, some folks asking about CAHOOTS program, specifically about just the sheer number of firearms in the American population, and how we can deal with transferring calls into a CAHOOTS type of response, given that we also do have, sometimes people will be confronted with situations where there are firearms involved. So curious to hear about that.
Sure. And this is, one area where we do encounter a lot of resistance, because there is this constant perception that the types of responses that a CAHOOTS model is going to be taking are inherently dangerous. And that is predicated on, a combination of white fragility and pervasive othering. When we allow that fear that this situation is automatically going to unfold violently, then we're completely dismissing what else is going on. But we do recognize that there are some situations where, there is going to be a weapon, and it's going to be a primary factor in the response. CAHOOTS teams are civilian first response teams. We're not armed. We don't carry a pepper spray. We don't carry a taser. We don't wear a vest. And so because of that, there are going to be those situations where we need to be a little bit more cautious with safety for that response team. If a situation emerges where there is a firearm that's on scene that is unsecured, that's unable to be secured, and we have somebody who is unwilling to meet at an alternate location, then in those very rare and infrequent situations, we are going to be utilizing our other partners in public safety, the more traditional response in the form of police, to assist in the initial de-escalation of the scene. Our objective there is really just to secure the weapon and then make sure that the scene can be turned over to the CAHOOTS response, so that that officer is then able to completely disengage and leave the call. To get to that point, we have to work with dispatch. And because of that dispatch, we've chosen, because of that dispatch resource, we've chosen to remain on the priority channels for patrol in our community. And that means that officers are hearing the calls that CAHOOTS teams are going out to. CAHOOTS teams are hearing the calls that officers are responding to. And because we have that radio on our shoulder, we have that direct communication. If something escalates, and it's very rare, we're able to get on that radio and say, hey, we need an officer here right now, instead of getting on a phone, calling, getting put on hold, and saying, okay, we need somebody to come out, and kind of working through a more circuitous process. Kind of going back to what I talked about in the introduction around that 18,000 calls for service that CAHOOTS responded to in Eugene in 2019, out of that 18,000 responses, there were 311 situations where CAHOOTS requested traditional public safety support. That's including the fire department, and including situations where we have somebody who's not escalated but can't contract for safety, and we need assistance in placing a hold on somebody so we can empower them to keep themselves and others safe. That's 311 situations out of 18,000 calls where things escalated beyond our ability as unarmed civilian first responders to handle. we've been able to identify, even within that 311 calls, that the majority of those situations were not because of specifically a mental health condition or presentation, but more often than not had some sort of alcohol intoxication as a factor that allowed other components to escalate in a way that, you know, in a situation that probably wouldn't have unfolded if alcohol had been present. So, you know, really, you know, we can't continue to look at this as an issue of that person is unsafe. You know, we need to recognize that crisis occurs when a need goes unmet, and that when we allow those needs to remain unmet for longer and longer periods of time, it's only natural for us to see more and more public, more and more escalated responses to that unmet need. And you know, I can't say enough that I wholeheartedly reject this notion that the people that are in crisis, the people that are in need in our community that CAHOOTS is responding to are inherently dangerous. You know, you know, you can talk to the families of Charles Landeros, Elabora Rodriguez, and Stacey Kenny to find out what happens when police get involved instead of sending CAHOOTS out, and that's within the Eugene and Springfield community. You know, it's not the patients that are the dangerous ones. I think ultimately is what I would say there.
Just to add a little bit to what Tim said, as I mentioned earlier, right, only 4% of the calls that police get are violent calls. This conception that police are responding to dangerous situations constantly is just entirely false. They spend about a third of their time doing traffic calls, right? There's an accident, someone calls the police. So this idea that we need police because there are a lot of guns and there is constant violence that police are responding to just isn't true. I agree that sometimes there are going to be cases where there are guns, right? But currently that is a very, very small percentage of what police deal with. So yes, there are a lot of guns in America, but police aren't really doing anything to improve that. They're often bringing a gun to an otherwise non-violent situation.
Thank you. Tricia, did you want to ask a question?
I did. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. I did want to ask each of the panelists if they care to respond. What kinds of things do they see that give you hope that we're going to win, for example, justice or defunding the police? If the panelists would care to answer that question, I'd really appreciate it.
I'll go. I watched the National Black Convention last night, and it was amazing. And if you didn't get to watch it, look it up on YouTube. That's what gives me hope. It's hosted by the Movement for Black Lives.
I'm happy to go on, add on to that. I guess I partly to say that I do the work I do because I'm an optimist. It'd be hard to keep going if you weren't optimistic, I think. I also feel like the more that, well, first of all, 6 months ago, people were not saying defund the police anywhere, right? And now they're saying it all the time, and it's getting into mainstream publications. And I think the more, and you know, I think Adem, you set it up really well. It's actually like, it's not radical, it's actually just totally rational, because police aren't working and police are part of oppression. And the more that we have those conversations, the more we just, it's a little bit like Bernie has done, the more we just make it sound, of course that makes sense. Of course everyone should have free access to college. Of course everyone should have health care. Of course we should be able to figure out a way to have safety, and that putting guns, armed police people in situations doesn't make us more safe. I just hope that we just keep talking about it more. And then I do also just want to add on to Cassia that I've been super inspired this spring by the protests that are day in and day out. And they are multiracial, and they are young and old, but they're mostly young Black and brown people. And I'm just really inspired by that energy and passion and thoughtfulness and creativity. And just to give you one example in DC, so you'll probably all know our mayor painted Black Lives Matter in the street in big letters, even though she's not really a champion of issues that Black Lives Matter cares about. So right next to that, they painted defund the police. And then it happened a few weeks later that they needed to repave that part of the street where it said defund the police. But 2 weeks later, the activists were back, Black Lives Matter, and they painted defund the police again. So I just love it. And I just hope they keep doing it. And, you know, as Cass said, it's like, if I'm able to be an elected official, I'm going to be looking to that kind of energy and activism to give me the base and give me the support to be able to put forward bold initiatives among my colleagues and say, I got the people with me. So that's what gives me hope.
Yeah, and for me, it's definitely, as well as what Cassia and Ed said, the people who are out in the streets in the millions. This is the largest movement that we've seen, I think, in the history of the country, by some estimates. And this is during a pandemic, right? Like we have a lot of energy here, which is definitely a reason to be hopeful. And every day I'm working with volunteers who are doing the work and meeting with these elected officials and holding them accountable. So I'm seeing it every day as a possibility. We've already had some wins in some cities across the country. So it's just a matter of persevering and pushing through to get the right thing done.
Yeah, you know, I'm very privileged with the role that I have to be able to have these types of conversations day in and day out, and really engaging with stakeholder groups and communities across the political spectrum on a national level gives me a lot of optimism. You know, the fact that so many more of us, myself included, have developed this new vocabulary over the last few months. You know, this real crash course on just the reality of life in a late stage capitalist country like America, you know, is just amazing. Just hearing the language, the vocabulary that my 7-year-old uses to even kind of talk about things now shows me that there is so much progress that can happen. Looking at a more local level, though, you know, I am so blown away with the development of our own county's mutual aid network, and with some of the other community mediation, decriminalization, and demilitarization, you know, groups that have formed and are really finding cohesion and gaining traction. And you know, as Ed said, you know, and as Cassia said, we need more people to be running. You know, we've got this ability to talk about this. We're all getting really good at identifying the issue and coming up with these ideas. But you know, I think if we're going to carry this momentum and really build on the optimism that the four of us are really talking about right now, you know, we need people to be willing to put themselves out there to run, you know, for public office, and to really help us, just make the change happen that we've been talking about.
Wonderful.
We have a bunch more questions from
good. Go ahead.
the audience.
Okay, cool.
Just a couple, Ed, that I want to direct to you. You mentioned gentrification. Have you encountered any issues with policing that links back to real estate lobby at the city level?
I think just in general, you hear the powerful interest pushing back against any sort of change because they fear what it will do to their profits. So, you know, I'm also supportive of decriminalizing sex work in the city because sex work is just work. It's whether people are choosing to do it or have to do it. It's a way of making money, and almost all the people who are engaged in sex work who interact with the police are Black. How many of them are transgender? They say they feel less safe because it's criminalized. So I'm listening to them when I say we should decriminalize sex work in the city. But of course, I think then that you know the gentrification, the developers, the moneyed interests in the city are nervous. It's like, well, what does that mean? Does that mean we're going to have sex workers running all over the street? Which is, of course, not necessarily not the case. And I just think you find, just in general, the more people are invested in the current system, the more they don't want it to change. And I have not seen yet, like the real estate industry, you know, folks say we shouldn't defund the police because our property values will decline. But I would not be surprised if that doesn't come around the corner. And I certainly would not be surprised if we start hearing that message from the wealthier parts of town, because they see the police as really reinforcing the system that's benefiting from them. I think we're also fortunate in DC that we are a progressive community. Even our high-income people here are mostly Democrats. And so I'm hopeful that there can be some conversations, but I wouldn't be surprised if it comes.
Yeah, here in Louisville, we're definitely seeing that fight. As details of Breonna Taylor case is coming out, what we have found is that the police pursuing Breonna Taylor was killed in her apartment, which is halfway across the city from a place where Metro was really interested in redeveloping that area. And so there's been a connection between the effort to gentrify or clean up this particular area with the killing of Breonna Taylor. And so we in our community are really fighting for land trust and control over property as a way to protect ourselves, because we've got outsiders who are looking at our communities as if they're literally colonialists who are coming to reclaim land in our community that has been left vacant from disinvestment. So we definitely see a connection there, and starting to really, I think our mayor is getting pressure around what to do with the protesters, because most of downtown is boarded up. I don't know how much plywood could be created or if folks are investing in plywood right now, but there's the community is boarded up downtown because the business owners who don't live downtown or don't live in our communities are afraid of seeing Black and brown bodies on the streets every day. So there certainly is a connection, and I've been calling for the decommoditization of land. Like, why is land a commodity, and how can we make it a public good? Part of my bigger vision for our world.
Thanks, Cassia.
Hey, Molly.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, sorry. The question you were reading before, I was being overly proactive and moved it to answered as you were reading it. So I put it in the chat for you. Sorry about that.
No problem. Thank you. I actually want to do we'll get back to that question, but I just want to do a quick question for Cassia. Somebody's saying, having lived in a rural community in an abusive marriage in which the local police department helped me and my children get free from that relationship, my first reaction to defund the police was to shudder. I'm certainly not alone. Are rural police budgets different than larger city budgets as far as the issue of defunding is concerned?
I would say one of the things that we have is we have rural communities who don't have local police departments, and so they have state police that that protect their communities. And what we've heard is tons of people coming up missing in their local communities, and people in rural communities calling our state police drive gray cruisers, and they call them the gray boys. I think there are individuals in the system who do good jobs, who do good work, and they wake up every day to serve the public, but the system itself is broken. And so we've got to find new ways to protect individuals. And I would just say that I think there could be an alternative to police to help in those types of situations. Yeah, I think about when Breonna Taylor was killed and her mother showed up on site, and she asked where her daughter was. And for about an hour, she was given the runaround and she was told to go to the hospital. And when she went to the hospital, she sat there and she talked to the hospital workers. And for 2 hours, they looked for her at the hospital. And then she went back to the site. and police officers began asking her questions about her daughter's relationship with her boyfriend and her daughter's relationship with other people. And when they couldn't get any other answers, they finally told her that her daughter was dead in the apartment. And when I heard that story, I got pissed off at our community. Why wasn't there anyone there for Tamika Palmer to call when she arrived at the scene? She shouldn't have had to deal with that by herself. There wasn't a minister in the community. There wasn't anybody she didn't have anybody. She just went by herself. And so I think that we can find alternatives to support each other. When challenges happen, there are tons of guns in our communities, and we do inflict harm on ourselves. But I think that if we could get together and find ways to go govern together, then we can find alternatives to support each other in times when we need it that don't involve the police.
Tim, I wonder if you want to sort of jump in on that too.
You know, what Cassia pointed out there, it really resonates for me from this kind of standpoint of looking at, you know, what happens when folks experience trauma, you know, and that when we can start to recognize that these institutions inherently are causing trauma to communities or to individuals, you know, we can start to find ways to interrupt that trauma, you know, and, you know, thinking about Brianna's mother, that, you know, there's a whole set of responses that could have gone into that would have made that process a lot simpler. She could have started that grieving 3 hours earlier. You know, if there had been, you know, another group there that could have supported more direct communication with law enforcement, you know, with the officers that were on scene. And yeah, you know, it's kind of this idea that neurons that fire together wire together, right? And so, you know, just really, yeah, it's about that interruption of trauma. And if we can really work together and find this alternative response, if we can really identify who those groups could be that could come in and provide those additional supports, then we can interrupt that trauma before the neurons wire together.
Wonderful. Tricia, do you want to ask another question?
The question that I wanted to ask, I really would like to give our panelists, first of all, I want to thank you all immensely. You've done a beautiful job of speaking to the issue of defunding the police. And each person and each organization is working very hard. And we think this is a critical movement issue. So I would like each of the panelists to speak to ways that people can engage with them and support their work. Let's start with Tim.
I'm not gonna do the fundraising pitch because that's not important to me. What's important is that we get out there and that we talk to our neighbors. You know, whether that's however you can do that in a safe way now, but really talk to your neighbors. If we really want to support this concept, that means that we need to be willing to have hard conversations, that we need to be able to engage in mediation and de-escalation rather than calling the cops when somebody's having that fight next door. So, you know, really, in order to really support bringing the CAHOOTS model to, you know, other communities, I would say it's about getting out there, talking, having conversations, you know, going to town halls, you know, going to city council budget sessions, you know, be informed and talk to each other. But if you are interested in supporting Whitebird Clinic, you can go to the website and click the buttons too. But really, if you've got a resource, you know, use it for your community. You know, lift up the folks next door, you know, down the block.
Thanks, Tim. Who wants to go next?
I can go. With the Grassroots Law Project, I lead a team, or I work with a team of volunteers all around the country who are meeting with elected officials and pressuring them to pursue defunding locally. So in that process, I'm on calls with volunteers every day, doing the research into the local budget and thinking up proposals that they want to push locally. So if you want to start pushing for defunding locally, if you want to start pressuring your elected officials, you can go to grassrootslaw.org/volunteer. And from there, you'll be invited to join our Slack workspace. And if you're a volunteer with the Bernie campaign, you're familiar with Slack then. That's a tool that we're using to organize a lot of our different programs, including the Defund the Police team. And I'd be very excited to start working with anyone who wants to get started on defunding locally.
And that can be anywhere at all in the country.
Yep.
Fantastic. Cassia, you want?
Yeah, I'll go. I'm a community organizer and I tell stories, so I can't stop not telling a story. So about 10 minutes after Breonna's Law, the no-knock warrant ordinance was passed, the president of the council came up to me and he asked, would $1 million help with the co-op? I'm building a cooperative grocery store in my community. And I was like, yeah, sure. And so in a matter of 10 days, that number went from $1 million to $250,000 to $500,000 to the council appropriating a $3.5 million bond to support the Louisville Community Grocery. However, they're making us bid for the money. They used the name that we, our corporate, our legal name that we've incorporated for the cooperative grocery store, and it's become a political football. And in the midst, it's sickening really, in the midst of folks calling for our local government to do something else. We've been organizing for 5 or 6 years around this grocery store, and for there finally to be local government investment, they kind of jerk us around. And those are the kind of things that happen in local communities on a regular basis. People are trying to organize their communities to do the things that they want to do, and local government gets in the way. So you can find us, the Louisville Community Grocery, on all social media mediums. And we're also, Kentuckians for the Commonwealth are also working really, really hard to engage voters in this election cycle. And we have the biggest job, I think, for anybody across the country to replace Mitch McConnell. We're very serious about that. We think it's possible. Again, I will say that we don't have the ultimate candidate that we want, but we're working on her, and our job will be to replace her as soon as we get her elected. So if you want to support our voter work, you can go to kftc.org and support that. I really appreciate being here. Tim has given me tons of ideas. I'm thinking about our corrections budget and the fact that 70% of folks who are held in our local jail are held because of pretrial. And so we've got a couple of local bail fund projects here that work with those folks and try to get them out. But that's a kind of a first kind of thing that people can look at is kind of pretrial and stopping the use of bail for people. That's one thing that in the system that we can stop right now.
Okay. Oh, good. Go ahead, Ed. I thought you were being shy. Go ahead.
I was being shy, but we all had to participate. Well, you know, obviously I'd love everyone to at least check out my campaign and see if it inspires you to do your own campaign or to support me if you're a DC resident. So my campaign site is edfordc.com. That's edfordc.com. I do encourage folks to just keep up the activism. I don't know if I need to tell anybody that, but it clearly works. I'm, reminded of Franklin Delano Roosevelt when he was meeting with somebody. He said, talking to a bunch of activists. He said, that's a great idea. Now go out and make me do it, right? Like, even if elected officials agree, it's when the community is there speaking over and over again that you have that pressure to do it. And I also just encourage people to, again, maybe common sense, keep having those conversations, not with the people that you'll never be able to persuade, but those folks in the middle, whether it's your loved ones or your friends or relatives, and just, help them see that vision that you see as well. I was asked as a candidate, like, what would you do if someone said, that they're scared about reducing the police force, and it was, a senior citizen. And I thought, well, I would ask that senior citizen, what do you need from the city right now? What is the city not doing for you in terms of helping your home be accessible, or wellness centers? And by the way, if we spend less on police, maybe we could help more for you. Or to have conversations with, why do you think those teenagers are hanging out on the street? And why do you think they make you feel unsafe? And what could actually help them be better, live up to their dreams in a way that would help them and also make you feel more safe. And so anyway, those are the kind of conversations I try to have. And I'm sure many people who are following do the same thing. And I just encourage everyone to keep doing that, help us build towards that beautiful vision that we all have on this call.
Thanks, Ed.
Awesome. And we wanted to also say that as so many of you all are doing too, the Bernie Book Club is planning to, make calls for candidates and continue to, do our collaborative effort to continue organizing and pushing for the people that we want to see in office and the things we want to see happen. And we would love to have you join us. If anybody is interested in making calls with us, we will do it on Zoom and get together, and it's fun. So just message us on Facebook if you want to be part of that.
Do we have time for another question or two?
We do, yes.
Do you have questions?
We have
more.
We have
Go
a lot
ahead.
of questions. Thank you all so much for all these questions. I think we had about 40 some odd questions come in. It's incredible. So Andra, you've been looking at the questions. Do you have any ideas? Just been in the background there. I just haven't been looking at the moment.
I just really sprung it on me. Give me a second.
Sorry.
Well, I had a
it's
question
okay.
for him.
Somebody said
Does your organization have like a consulting arm, or like have you carved out space to support other organizations or communities who are wanting to create this, or is it kind of on an ad hoc basis?
Yeah, we've been doing it ad hoc for a really long time, but because of the level of demand that's come up just in the last couple of months, we've had 320 different requests from cities across North America. And so now I am leading the new consulting arm of Whitebird Clinic. So we're just like responding to any other crisis that will be happening in our local community. We're trying to show up and meet communities where they're at, and to accomplish that, yeah, we're trying to dedicate as much staff time as we can to support all these other cities that are looking at this.
Right, and could you also mention the congresspersons who have introduced legislation similar?
Yeah, so we worked with Senator Ron Wyden's office to develop the CAHOOTS Act, and that was then introduced to Congress by Peter DeFazio. So that's the CAHOOTS Act, and I guess maybe one extra plug: call your electeds and ask them to please support that measure. The CAHOOTS Act, if passed, would provide through Medicaid funding up to 95% of the cost of operations for a program for the first 3 years. Which really takes a lot of the burden off of cities initially, to really fund these pilot programs, and so it really gives, if it were to pass, this resource would allow communities to really focus on the outcomes rather than, splitting hairs to figure out how to fund it initially. So.
Okay, well, I'll work on Yarmouth. He's the
fantastic
chair, so.
Thanks, Cassia.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll go back to the question that I accidentally moved while Molly was trying to read it. Sorry about that. It's a question for Ed. It's from a resident of Ward 6 in DC. says, do you see a one-size-fits-all template for social workers, mental health professionals, et cetera, that could work for all cities to replace or reduce police officers? If not, what do you think cities can do as a first step to identify their own unique needs and meet those needs without armed police?
I think they can call Tim. No, I mean, seriously, I mean, I know in DC, we actually passed legislation a couple of years ago, the NEAR Act, to try to take more of a public health approach to public safety. And the idea within that would be that in responding to calls to the police, it wouldn't just be a police officer who went out, that it would be a police officer, and depending on the situation, somebody from the Department of Behavioral Health or our Department of Human Services. And unfortunately, we just haven't implemented that. But to me, that maybe is one part of a transition. If people are nervous about getting rid of police, to at least start by having other people go along with police while they maybe shift to more of a CAHOOTS model. That's certainly what I'd like to see as a starting point in DC.
Thank you. And one more if we have time. I think we have time. Molly, what do you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
This one is from Dean. It's for Tim. It says, your program sounds encouraging as a way to provide help to people in need without police involvement. Can you see challenges to scaling it up to state or even national programs? What did you learn or what resistance did you get from folks in Portland or New York, for instance?
So in Portland, the resistance that we've seen has come from the police union, which was surprising to me because in a lot of other communities across the U.S., we're hearing, you know, leadership, presidents of unions saying that our officers, our members don't want to be mental health professionals. They don't want to be taking social service calls. So to hear that resistance from, you know, unions in Portland was a little surprising for me. Again, that resistance was all framed around that perception of safety. You know, and this concern that unarmed responders are going to have the same types of violent outcomes that armed responses have been having, which completely ignores, you know, the key factors in those situations escalating, which is oftentimes the presence of a uniform, a badge, and a gun. You know, when we're looking, you know, to these larger communities, you know, the question of scalability is something that we're still trying to wrestle with. And I think Portland, Oregon is going to be one of the first larger cities to implement this programming across the city to show us what this looks like scaled up. You know, we know from really working with Portland as well as Denver that it can be really easy to identify specific regions, you know, or kind of look at a heat map almost of different call types, where they're occurring most frequently and what times of day. That can help inform how many units, you know, a city might want to start with. That can inform where, you know, a pilot program might happen if it's not going to be citywide. In Denver, which started the STAR program in June, they chose to focus on their downtown core because that was where they identified the most need, you know, the most responses that police were engaged in for these social service calls. You know, what's happening in Oakland is really more looking at not any specific neighborhood, but identifying the specific call types that their mobile crisis unit is going to be responding to. And that's going to tell them kind of where their initial call volume is probably going to be. But, you know, again, just like each community needs to identify the resources that are going to be most helpful and necessary to prevent, you know, police from interacting with folks in crisis. You know, each city is really going to need to identify for them what is going to work as we identify, you know, the scale of or the scope of this program, you know, if it's something that a community even wants to implement.
Thank you so much. You briefly mentioned the police. You briefly mentioned police unions, and Adam, I'm guessing that's something that you've probably come across too with your work. I know we're sort of almost running out of time, but do you want to say quick words about that and ways that can be countered by the community, or what ways that people could help in countering that, the power of the police union, essentially?
Yeah, definitely. There was a question earlier that I answered where someone asked, what is the big pro-police force that is fighting against this? Like, is there an opposition that's well-formed? And police unions are definitely that. Police unions consistently push for zero accountability for police officers, essentially. In their union contracts, they push for allowing officers to see evidence before being questioned about things, so that they have enough time to come up with a plausible story for it. They have elements in police union contracts that destroy the records after a year, after 2 years, which makes it almost impossible to know what an officer has done in the past and see patterns of their misconduct. So yes, definitely police unions are a huge impediment to any progress that we want to see. And one big element we can do to push against the influence that police unions have is demanding that elected officials do not accept money from police unions. That money is a reflection of their control over elected officials in large part. So that's something that we consistently call for with any elected official. And then the other element is that we have to organize against them. They are well-resourced and they are well-established. They are a political force in many cities across the country. And it's really hard to remove that without just consistent organizing against it. So it's going to be a long fight against the influence that police unions have, but we have the people and we're on the right side of it.
We have found that our local FOP contract is being renegotiated now, and it's tied to a state law that is preventing some of the things that we want to see change. So there's tons of work to do.
Yep, you might have to change the law. Ladies, is it okay for me to start my thank yous?
Bring us out, Trish.
Okay. Well, the Bernie Book Club would like to thank everyone for joining us today. We hope you received some information that inspires you to support the movement. There is no question that the movement needs you. Where can you lend a hand? Can we vote to elect more progressive candidates? Can we organize to flip the Senate? Write a letter, sign a petition, make a donation. This weekend, we celebrate 57 years since the March on Washington. To honor those who fought so hard and encouraged us to believe we could make a better world for our children, please support the movement. We thank each and every panelist so much for your time, the hard work that you're doing. We wish you the best. We're going to share your information. And again, to the audience, if you'd like to join us in some of our supportive efforts, we'd love to have you. Just send us an email. I think that email information is being shared on the screen. Yep, we would like to encourage everyone to do what you can to show some love and give some support. Thank you everyone so much for being here. Peace and blessings to all.